Good afternoon and welcome. I'm happy to welcome you all. My name is James Keenan. I'm the director of the Jesuit Institute, and we're sponsoring the Canisius Lecture as part of this 4-day event called Our Common Home. This is a project that has been sponsored by the Institute for Liberal Arts, the Jesuit Institute, and about 8 other different entities here on campus, with a committee of about 14 of us who've been meeting since March for these events. You should know that as we began our plans for this in March, we're anticipating the Pope's visit. Our first decision was to invite Cardinal Turkson. We thought if we could get Cardinal Turkson, we could get others. We invited Cardinal Turkson. He accepted our invitation through Father Michael Czerny, and the rest was a nice unfolding. This afternoon, we had Senator Edward Markey from Massachusetts, who was just sensational, giving us the opener. And then after him, Dr. John Holdren, who is the Director of Science and Technology for the White House and who is actually leading the COP21 delegation from the United States to Paris in December. Before I introduce David Quigley, the provost of the university, who will then introduce Cardinal Turkson for his lecture, Sustainable Humanity, Sustainable Planet, we have a little presentation to do. And the presentation is this, that several weeks ago, Father Robert Verreck began thinking of the Laudato Si', and he wrote down words for a song called Laudato Si', Praise Be. Subsequently, Paul Melly composed it. So Father Robert Verreck, who's over there in the corner, and Paul Melly, who will be joining us in a moment, they will be leading us in considering Laudato Si', Praise Be. So Paul and company, and then after that there'll be introductions and a little bit of housekeeping.
What in the world have we done to this earth with all its beauty and splendor? If we only had the eyes with which to see Mother Earth once teeming with all kinds of life, now gasp for air and thirst for water. Can't you find a way to renew her? Can we see change? Yes, I see change. Laudato Si', Laudato Si', praise be, praise be. Laudato Si', Laudato Si', praise be, praise be. To the God who creates and sustains all life, let us sing Laudato Si', praise be. Hallelujah. Praise be, praise be. What in the world have we done to this earth with all its beauty and harmony? If we only had the ears with which to hear Mother Earth once ringing with all kinds of sounds, now silences the songs of beasts and birds. May she sing to us a way to renew her. Can we hear change? Yes, indeed, change. La da to see, la da to see. Praise be, praise be. La da to see, la da to see. Praise be, praise be. To the God who creates and sustains all life. Let us sing, let us sing, praise be. Praise be, praise be. Praise be, praise be. What in this world have we done to the earth with all its poor and suffering? If we only gave our hands to hold, to reach Mother Earth with great abundance for us all, now feeding few and wasting away. Can she unite us in a love for the world? Can we love change? Can we be changed? La da to see, la da to see. Praise be, praise be. La da to see, la da to see. Praise be, praise be. To the God who creates and sustains all life. Let us sing, let us sing, let us sing. Praise be, let us sing, let us sing. Praise be. Praise be, praise be. Praise be, praise be. Praise be, praise be. Praise be, praise be.
If we could ask Father Robert Burek to stand. He wrote the lyrics, and Paul there is the composer. The format this evening will be that the provost, Dr. David Quigley, will introduce Cardinal Peter Turkson in his address. His address will go roughly 45 minutes, and then we should have about 25 to 30 minutes for questions and answers. We will end at 6 o'clock promptly. It's my style. In order to ask questions, Tara Garreau, Dan DeLeo, and Brian Garreau will be walking around holding cards saying, do you want to ask a question? Well, they won't say that. But they'll be doing this during the Cardinal's talk, and they'll be gathering them. And during the question and answer, Provost Quigley will be asking the questions of the Cardinal. And that's how we'll be proceeding. If you would like to tweet today's most inspirational moments, our hashtag is BC Common Home. So let me introduce David Quigley. David Quigley is, as of June 1st, 2014, has been Provost and Dean of Faculties at Boston College, where he is also Professor of History. A historian of the 19th century American city, Quigley received his BA in American Studies from Amherst College and his MA and PhD in History from New York University. Quigley's research explores the history of race and democracy in the urban United States between the Revolution and Reconstruction, with a particular focus on New York City. Between 2008 and 2014, he served as Dean of the College and Graduate School of Arts and Sciences at Boston College, during which time he oversaw the hiring of 160 new faculty colleagues, helped lead the design and construction of a new 180,000 square foot humanities building, Stokes, and initiated a multi-year core renewal project focused on the university's extensive undergraduate core curriculum. He lives in Cambridge, Massachusetts, with Megan DeMott Quigley and their 3 children. David.
Thanks, Jim. It's great to see so many people here today, and distant hello to those who went over to McGuinn, to the overflow room, a real testament to the interest in this topic and the urgency that the community feels. What a wonderful start to this week-long conference. I'm grateful to Father Keenan and Professors Noah Snyder, Brian Garreau, and Tara Pisani-Garreau, and the members of the Planning Committee for all they've done to pull together our common home. This is just what a Jesuit Catholic university should be doing this week and at this moment in history. The events of the last few days have been remarkable on so many levels. All of us are called to reflect on Pope Francis's words and actions. This is a prayerful time for the Church and a moment when we all need to think long and hard about our commitments. I'm pleased to see that the Environmental Studies program has taken the lead, along with the Jesuit Institute, in the conversation here at Boston College about our shared responsibility to our common home. In recent years, we've elevated environmental studies to major status, and we continue to hire a cohort of talented faculty across the university who've added exceptional cross-disciplinary strength in the science, the ethics, and the policy of climate change. I'm excited to see how this still young community of scholars and teachers help us over many years to better understand the challenges we all face. While the academic side of the university has expanded and deepened our offerings in areas related to the environment, colleagues in facilities and in the Executive Vice President's office have led the way in containing and reducing the university's reliance on fossil fuels, even as we've expanded the amount of square footage on campus this past decade. Recent experience suggests that such cross-campus partnerships and collaborations will be essential moving forward. But this afternoon, of course, is not just about Boston College, not just about the local dimensions of this crisis. We're called to think more expansively, to imagine, and thus it is my great honor to introduce someone who has emerged as a particularly important and eloquent leader and thinker for the Universal Catholic Church. Cardinal Peter Turkson is Archbishop Emeritus of Cape Coast in his native Ghana and has been since 2013 President of the Pontifical Council for Justice and Peace. In the last 30 months, he has emerged as a critical voice in Pope Francis's Vatican, serving on the following congregations: for the doctrine of the faith, for divine worship and the discipline of the sacraments, for the evangelization of peoples, for Catholic education. In his free time, he serves on various pontifical councils and committees. Cardinal Turkson played a leading role in the drafting and release of Laudato Si earlier this year. This afternoon's Canisius lecture, as Jim Keenan pointed out, is titled Sustainable Humanity, Sustainable Planet. Boston College is blessed to have Cardinal Turkson with us this afternoon. Please join me in welcoming him here to Chestnut Hill.
So good afternoon, my dear friends. After listening to a nice Bostonian or Massachusetts English, I'm going to be treating you to what you might call African English. Having done 4 years in Albany as a theology student between 71 and 75, subsequently gone to, taught in Africa, taught in Ghana, spent time in Ivory Coast, now in Italy, and spent time in Germany, partly in Israel, so I don't know what English I speak now. It's a little bit of everything. So I'll try to do it very slowly so that we can communicate, so that we'll be able to understand each other, and so enable you at the end of all of this to be able to fire all your questions. So president of the Boston College, the provost, all of you dear members of staff, Reverend Fathers, dear students, sometime last year in March 2014, during a visit, a very regular visit to Pope Francis to discuss the business of our office, Pope Francis revealed that he was thinking of writing an encyclical on natural and human ecology, and asked me what I thought of that project. Not just say, Holy Father, it's great, how can we do it? And so he says, so think about it. So I went away, came to my office, met our team, and then mentioned it to them. But very many of them used to how former popes used to write encyclicals, recognize that when a pope wants to do an encyclical, he constitutes a group, then has a session with the group to indicate the main directions that he wants the encyclical to take and all of that. Francis was not going to adopt that style. So he left it to us, to our great creativity, innovativeness, and imagination. So then on Palm Sunday, after Mass, as he went around to greet people, he came to me and then I said, so Holy Father, when can we get together? In response, everybody saw on television the Pope saying, you continue to write. And so we came away and we constituted a group, recognizing that the encyclical was going to be going to the whole world, not limited to the Catholic Church. So we had people from the United States, Catholic University of Washington, from Germany, from Italy, from Ireland, and southern France. So we had this group together, and with this group, we worked on a draft. This was in April. And knowing that the Holy Father normally takes vacation in August, July and August, we thought if we had it ready before that, then he would use his vacation to work on it. So at the end of his vacation in August, we'd have an encyclical ready. We were wrong. So we rushed to get the encyclical ready by the beginning of July. And so submitted it. But as you see now, it took almost a year. And as he said in one interview during his flight back from the Philippines, he mentioned that we help with a draft, but so that he doesn't come out with anything stupid, he consulted and checked with so very many other people, which he himself recognizes that there are so very many who made inputs into that encyclical. But thanks be to God, now we have the encyclical Laudato Si. And naturally, journalists have called our office and wanted to know the nature of the draft we submitted to the Holy Father. But again, being in Rome and knowing how things are sometimes, somebody takes a document from the Holy Father and says, from my knowledge of the Pope, I can circle out what lines came from the Pope's hand and what came from other people's hands. So we've not given any interview about what the draft was. For us, it doesn't matter. All what matters is the encyclical signed by Pope Francis, and that is the only encyclical we have to talk about. Just a few days ago, in an interview in New York City, somebody asked whether from the draft we submitted there are new things that I would have wished, some things that I would have wished to see in the encyclical. I said, it doesn't matter. What we have is that we have an encyclical of Pope Francis, and that's all we have. Whatever any of us had, whatever, it doesn't matter whether we would have liked to see anything inside the encyclical or not. So tonight, under the particular theme suggested to us, I'm not going to be doing a general presentation of the encyclical, which will be a story in itself, but try to respond to it by way of respond to the sustainability question raised, and especially in the light of climate change. So I wish to thank you all sincerely, especially the staff of this university, for the invitation extended to me to enable me share these thoughts with you this afternoon on the encyclical and the ethical demands that it makes on us, especially when we confront the issue of climate change. We appreciate and admire you because this undertaking of this college is giving the full embrace of Pope Francis's vision, and you need to reach far and wide, but you also need to touch yourselves as you touch the encyclical of Pope Francis. And so briefly, I'd like to do this. I'd like to begin with a reflection on our common home. Then I will try to set the views of Pope Francis on climate change and the environment within the Catholic tradition, so the Church's social teaching, and then try to make a few applications of this to this university, and then, since we're here in the United States, to what the U.S. also can do by way of promoting this. So you all are probably aware of the broad vision of Laudato Si', this encyclical of Pope Francis. And here are some of the main outlines of that encyclical. Pope Francis seeks to affirm that humanity is not separate from the environment in which it lives, that we all, in a way, interconnected. And that's why he refers to the hymn of St. Francis to say, Francis sings about Brother Sun and Sister Moon, and that is about the interconnectedness between humanity and creation, nature, out of which was created. He also observed on the accelerating change in climate, and that this acceleration or this change in climate is undeniable, it is catastrophic, and it is worsened by human activities. A point, again, which is debated sometimes, but which, unfortunately, is true. But in the spirit of Pope John Paul II, when he addressed the United Nations in 1978, Pope Francis has great confidence in the capacity of human beings also to make correction and to reverse their state of affairs. So however catastrophic and bad this might be, he believes that it can still be changed by the human person. Then he goes on to observe that the grave errors that underline our disastrous indifference to the environment includes a throwaway culture of consumerism and a very naive confidence that technology and technological advances and undirected commercial market per se will inevitably and automatically solve the problems for us. Then he goes on also to observe in this encyclical the twofold crisis, which, however, can be overcome, not by more of the same, but through changes arising from generous dialogue and fundamental ethical and indeed spiritual decision-making on every level. So the very subtitle of the encyclical, On Care for Our Common Home, conveys an important conviction, and it is that individual homes are not isolated, and that each on its own come together to form the planet on which we live. They are all located within a single worldwide common home. And the encyclical is about the implications of living together in a common home. Boston is an ideal location in which to explore this notion of a common home. A most striking feature of this city, as all of you may know, is a thing of Boston Commons. You know about that? Okay. So during the 1930s, its 50 acres were used by many families as a cow or cattle pasture. However, this common good lasted for only a few years because affluent families bought additional cows, and this led to overgrazing. Fortunately, the common resource of this pasture land was rescued by a shared agreement limiting the number of cows to 70. So from this, we can draw two lessons for our topic. First, there is the overgrazing. The environmental degradation was not due to necessity, but to excess. Overgrazing by the extra livestock of affluent families happened because of materialism, because of greed, and because of consumerism, and perhaps also vanity. In the chapter called Human Roots of Our Ecological Crisis in Laudato Si, Pope Francis points to such vices as sources of the depletion of the natural environment. When many act on private self-interest, it endangers the common home in which we all live. The second lesson is this. It is about decisions. A limit on use of the pasture was set. The Bostonians must have had a way of deciding and of making the decision stick. Who did the limiting? How was the decision formulated? How was it endorsed and implemented? Pope Francis calls most forcefully for responsibility, for decisiveness, and for implementation. So the Boston Common and the overgrazing is a historical example of what has come to be known as the tragedy of the commons. This expression can apply to all situations where the self-interested actions of one or more agents deplete a common resource. For instance, in Laudato Si, the Pope declares the climate and the atmosphere to be common goods, belonging to all and meant for all. The oceans and other natural resources should likewise be considered as a global commons and protected by an appropriate system of governance. The principle of the universal destination of the goods of creation is also applied to the global carbon sinks of the atmosphere, oceans, and forests. In order to protect the poorest and to avoid dangerous climate change, these sinks must be prevented from overuse. So let me ask then the question again, who is going to decide fairly and squarely, and are the decisions really going to be carried out, and by whom? For all of these, then, Pope Francis calls for dialogue. Serious dialogue, the same way he presented this dialogue before the House of Congress the other day when he was speaking. When he presented his own intervention there and his own speech as a way of engaging in dialogue. On account of this, and by way of getting into responding to this question, let us briefly also consider the influence of Pope Francis and the Church authoring this encyclical. Pope Francis's concern for climate change as a moral issue and his call for climate change policies are firmly rooted in traditional Catholic teaching, which are sometimes referred to as the social teaching of the Church. The Christian commitment to care for our common home is as old as Genesis or Scriptures itself. There we read that all creation is good. Moreover, we also told that humanity is formed out of the dust of the earth and mandated by the loving Creator to till and to keep the earth. Catholic social teaching, since the Second Vatican Council, has increasingly recognized the care of creation, that this is intimately connected to other Christian ethical commitments. In particular, environmental harm compromises the commitment to promote the common good and to protect the human life and the dignity of individuals, especially of the poor and the vulnerable. Blessed Paul VI was the first to articulate a teaching in 1971 about development. He said that the new name of peace was development. Then after him, Pope John Paul II expanded on this and identified development as both human and natural. Then Pope Benedict XVI took the same concept and amplified it still more, talking not only about natural ecology and human ecology, but also social ecology and even ecology of peace. With these ecologies then, throughout these years, individual bishops and episcopal conferences have taken up these concepts and developed them, till Pope Francis in this encyclical introduces them as the integral ecology. Ecology of nature, ecology of the human person. And this is the core of the encyclical Laudato Si. So while tonight we'll be talking about climate change and its implications and what can be done by way of adopting measures against and mitigating climate change, I wish to remind all of us that as Pope Francis himself has had a chance to say this to the ambassadors, to the ministers of environment of Europe when they called on him in the Vatican the other day, his encyclical is not an encyclical on climate change. He says that his encyclical is a social encyclical, and therefore it is about human ecology and natural ecology. And he calls it a social encyclical. So about the well-being of the earth and the well-being of the human person. So for him, he was not writing an encyclical on climate change, although he does treat that subject matter in the encyclical, as we ourselves will see briefly. So, beginning with his choice then of a name, Francis, he's made concern for the poor and the planet a signature of his papacy. Moreover, he's explicitly inserted his teaching and indeed his leadership into the international political process, trying to respond to climate change. And this is now what we wish to briefly explore. Both the earth and human life for Pope Francis can all subject fragility. They can be made fragile by how humanity treats them. So, can Laudato Si then make a difference in the global discussion of the environmental issue as the whole world heads for Paris COP21 in December? COP21, Conference of Partners, will be a huge affair. The organizers expect 25,000 official delegates and another 25,000 participants with various interests. For example, there will be a group leaving from the Vatican on foot, walking all the way from the Vatican to Paris to demonstrate their concern for the need, or to kind of push the participants to take a decision. So several actors and players will be involved. Why then should we expect Laudato Si to cut through and to be a major influence? Primarily so because of Pope Francis himself. Since his election in March 2013, he has repeatedly conveyed his deep and sincere care for people's concerns and problems, especially those suffering from different kinds of exclusion. And accordingly, I had a chance to observe to National Geographic in an interview, just before the conclave, when all the cardinals gathered, we shared our views. There was a certain mood, as it were, saying, let's get a change. Let's not go for any more Pope from Europe, or, if you want, from Italy, although nobody verbalized that clearly, but that was a mood that hung over the whole conclave. Cardinal Bergoglio was basically unknown to several of the cardinals who had gathered, but then, when he intervened during the hall, just before the conclave, it was a kind of his own manifesto. He advised then, in his intervention, those of us gathered there, that we need to think about a church that goes out to the periphery, not just geographical periphery, but the periphery of human existence. For Cardinal Bergoglio, the gospel invites all of us to have that sort of sensitivity. That was his contribution, and it brought a sort of freshness to the exercise of pastoral care, a different experience of taking care of God's people. People trust Pope Francis as a deeply caring person. And any of you who was in Philadelphia these past few days must have seen the poster displayed all through the city. Pope Francis is the people's Pope. That flyer was all over. Francis, the people's Pope. This caring appears in Laudato Si. More than any other leader today, the Pope family links the issues of the natural world with those of the social world. Millions connect with him and trust him. The Pope speaks to the longing of people to be cared for and intend to exercise caring. He brings the basic message of Jesus, love one another as I have loved you, into the very heart of the world's greatest challenges, to care for the poor and to care for the planet. In Laudato Si, in fact, you, on reading the encyclical, will find that the relationship of human person to creation, traditionally usually expressed in terms of stewardship or custody of creation, is increasingly replaced by another expression. Indeed, in the whole encyclical, you find the word stewardship only twice. When Francis talks about our relationship with the creation, the word he uses is care. Care for creation. And if you want, you can discover the difference between the two. Anybody can exercise stewardship. It can be a duty, it can be a task. But when one cares, it's always with passion, it's always with attention, it's always with the heart. And that is the type of relationship that Francis promotes in this encyclical. So Laudato Si can help shape COP21 at several levels. First, it can nudge the negotiators and representatives to give greater weight to the real needs of many in each country. Secondly, it can impel the conversations and resolutions to reflect the indissoluble moral linkage between natural and social environment. Thirdly, it can convince decision makers that the world is now ready for real action as people express their assent to Laudato Si in terms of political support, for bold agreement, and for real action. Therefore, Laudato Si can reduce the risk of non-agreement, like in Copenhagen, and the even greater risk of a good agreement, as in Rio in 1992, which largely remained unimplemented. So we're hoping that with the publication of this encyclical, the impact will probably drive the negotiators in Rio, in Paris, to come to some definite conclusions. Having considered the impact and influence of Francis and his encyclical on what will happen in Paris in December, we can also briefly turn our attention now to ask what then are the specific contributions that this encyclical can make to the negotiations and international agreements that can take place there. We can list a few. Laudato Si is a formidable document. It may well make a robust contribution to the following, in the following three ways. First, the encyclical articulates virtues and ethical principles that can help shape negotiations about climate change. Ethical and virtues that can inspire the negotiations. These are essentially taken from the compendium of the social teachings of the church, and we can list a few like the virtue of prudence, which Laudato Si mentions, justice, which gives each person his or her due, temperance, which moderates sense pleasures and consumption, fortitude, which strengthens resolve against adversity, a commitment to protect human life and dignity, a preferential option for the poor and the vulnerable, solidarity, that is to say, a firm commitment to the common good and to a realization of the common good for all, respect for the common destination of the goods of the earth, companionship, integral ecology, and so on. These 10 virtues at least and ethical principles can open up the negotiations and decision-making to the needed commitments at global, national, and local levels. And in their absence, we're afraid Paris may well become another Rio 1992 or some other meeting. A second way in which the encyclical can push events in Paris is that Laudato Si can shape the road to Paris by appropriating the sorts of practical judgment which Pope Francis illustrates in the encyclical. Pope Francis insists that the global north has been a disproportionate consumer of creation's goods and contributor to the ecological harm. Therefore, it must also repay its ecological debt to the global south. He goes on also to emphasize the need to remove the influence of special interests from politics and political negotiations. He urges that countries do not place their national interests above the global common good. Encyclical also suggests and argues, in fact, against an ideology that myopically cares only for economic profit, absolutizes technology and material progress, and discounts ecological concerns. The encyclical advocates for investment practices that consider the ecological cost of transactions and asserts that technology based on the use of highly polluting fossil fuels, especially coal, but also oil and to a lesser degree still gas, need to be progressively replaced without delay by alternative sources of energy. And so again, from the dozen traditional virtues and principles, Pope Francis derives concrete and relevant recommendations. And the negotiators and decision makers at Paris are encouraged to do likewise. Thirdly, Laudato Si can catalyze an international climate change agreement through the actions of others whom it inspires and guides. And so, speaking at the World Meeting of Popular Movements early this year, Pope Francis recognized that justice often requires prudent political action from elected officials. At the same time, the Holy Father recognized that it is often not enough to simply rely on well-known or high-profile leaders for action. The future of humanity, as he said in Santa Cruz in Bolivia, the future of humanity does not lie solely in the hands of great leaders, the great powers, and the elite. Rather, it is fundamentally in the hands of peoples and their ability to organize. It is in their hands which can guide with humility and conviction this process of change. And as just a few hours ago, the senator recommended, responding to a question about what Boston College can do, he had recommended the formation of Massachusetts Campus Coalition for climate change. And this, again, will be something, a move that is coming not from politicians, but from ordinary people who can still come together and begin to make a point. This suggests that the 50,000 representatives who gather for COP21 in Paris need more than to hear the Pope's views on virtue, ethics, and their application. A successful COP21 will require the proactive, organized efforts of citizens who echo the Pope's message in the halls of power and demand courageous action by leaders on behalf of our common home. This being the case, one then may go on to ask, if this is what it's so for, how has the Pope's message generally been received? I'd say very positively so. From mails, emails, and letters and telegrams coming to our office, it's been very well received. We just again begin with another comparison. It's taken again from the United States, and I hope this comparison makes its point too. In the middle of the last century, cultural historians, social scientists, and policymakers were trying to understand the sad legacy of slavery in the United States and the plague of racism. They had different insights to offer, different solutions to propose, and these were taken up by political and cultural leaders too. But when Martin Luther King Jr. declared, "I have a dream," in August 1963, he somehow said much, much more. He translated comprehension into conviction, conviction into commitment, and commitment into willingness to act and even to risk. Similarly, the Pope's climate change encyclical expresses a compassionate vision of our current predicament and aims to inspire groups and institutions to come to terms with the depth of the climate problem and to act collectively and justly. Elected politicians, then public servants, research scientists, educators, business and religious leaders, shapers of culture and public opinion are playing important roles in shaping humanity's response to the environment. But in Laudato Si, the Holy Father does not shrink from naming the ideological distortions and the pragmatic errors that have brought the world to the very difficult decisions facing us. Nevertheless, neither pointing an accusing finger nor wagging it in condemnation will lead to change. Instead, it will be by seeing afresh and by reflection. It will be by honest discussion, indeed by honest dialogue, that one can find a solution and a way out. So it will be by dialogue and only by dialogue that Pope Francis suggests we find a solution to the problem facing us in climate change. So the environmental tragedy of the common good affects those directly involved. And climate being global, it also affects all the bystanders, even those who are not directly involved. But it can be overcome. And so instead of following narrow reductionist or short-sighted imperatives, we must adopt the imperative of care. Instead of maximizing greed and power, we can target what is best, that is, the optimum, the level of consumption that is enough to satisfy our need and leave an adequate supply for others. And so I believe that world leaders and citizens are learning to receive the Pope in this way as an exemplar of the imperative to love one another. Indeed, it's an imperative, an exemplar for self-restraint that then creates access for others. And so I trust that millions of people have listened to the Pope's message with open minds and open hearts. His message is fresh because it applies our deepest spiritual beliefs to our greatest challenges. I have little doubt that the message is getting through to most people in most places, just as his visit here to the United States have brought it home, also to the American people. And so do I hope that to the majority of its economic, political, cultural, and religious leaders, the message would also be very well received. Just last month in July, the 3rd of July, the president of France organized an event in France called Consciences for the Climate. And there, the French President, François Hollande, opening the conference, quoted profusely from the encyclical Laudato Si to suggest how Pope Francis, as it were, sets the trajectory along which that conference should travel. The same thing happened in New York on the 29th of June at a high-panel summit, which had also met to discuss climate change. So, just as Pope Francis wished at the beginning of the encyclical, this work is not destined and meant only for Catholics. It is meant for all who inhabit and dwell in this common home of ours. So, what can we do, especially here in Boston College, as a Catholic institution or Catholic university? Catholic institutions are committed to seeing farther and deeper, to looking beyond the current popular and conventional positions. And while they may have strengths in science and economics and so on, their Catholic uniqueness is to be experts in humanity. This means openness to all dimensions of the human. What Catholic institutions should bring to the public square is a constant focus on a new humanism, or if you want, a new humanistic synthesis, a new sense and a clear understanding of the human person, a basic anthropological point of departure, and a corresponding moral framework in which dialogue about climate change should occur. And if it will be useful to illustrate that, you certainly know that there are several states who have ambassadors to the Vatican or to the Holy See. If ever you have a chance to meet any of them, ask them about their business. Ambassadors to other states negotiate trade and negotiate all kinds of deals. So, what do ambassadors? So, the United States ambassador to the Vatican, what does he do? What does he negotiate about? No trade, because there's none, and no other. So, the only thing that they would have to negotiate about is what we're talking about, the well-being of the human person. This is the business of the Holy See. This is the business of the Church. This is the business of the Vatican. So ambassadors accredited to the Holy See end up invariably then discussing and taking up this issue, the well-being of the human person, and now Pope Francis asks the well-being also of our common home, the earth. This then becomes our common objective. And so Catholic universities should help their entire community to dialogue about shared responsibility, universal access to the goods of creation, common good, compassion, and solidarity, and the grounding of all of this in the equal human dignity of all persons. They should help their members and publics to see beyond the current dominant culture and to act consequently. And so if something like this is what a Catholic university here like Boston College can aspire after, what can Laudato Si then be saying to this country where we are, in the United States? I do not intend to repeat the content of the Pope's message to Congress. That was Pope Francis and did it more eloquently than I can ever aspire to do. But in discussing how Laudato Si can influence the path to Paris, even for the U.S. Bishops' Conference, it is important to include a relationship between faith and public life. Faith is not a private matter. It is not a subculture, as Pope Francis repeated before the Liberty Hall in Philadelphia Saturday afternoon. It is not something to be relegated to, as it were, some backyard or some back room. But faith is an essential component of the public space and the public life. Rather, the fullness of faith should inspire every act of individuals and common life, and inspire all efforts to make the world more loving and more just. This seems especially so in the United States, where the First Amendment to the Constitution protects citizens' freedom of religious expression. When someone objected to Laudato Si saying, I don't get economic policy from my bishop or cardinals and the Pope and so on. Okay, so you know what I'm going to say, I skipped that. But this was a question which was addressed to me by Christian Amanpour in Rome right after we had presented the encyclical. And since you know the story so well, I skipped that. So given the public nature of faith and the responsibility for Catholics to exercise what the U.S. bishops call faithful citizenship, Pope Francis has sought to shape the discourse and the negotiations leading to COP21. The Holy Father timed the release of Laudato Si so as to contribute to the maximum capacity to Paris. And throughout the encyclical, he emphasizes the need for an international climate change agreement. Addressing the U.S. Congress this past week, the Pope called for a courageous and responsible effort to redirect our steps and to avert the most serious effects of the environmental deterioration caused by human activity. And to the United Nations, just last Friday, he said we cannot permit ourselves to postpone certain agendas for the future. These are rather gentle words expressing very forceful reminders. And so despite the call of the Catholic Church for public policies in response to climate change as a moral issue, the world has failed to mitigate rising global greenhouse gas emissions and to provide sufficiently for their impact, for those impacted by this reality. Accordingly, the global atmospheric concentration of carbon dioxide today is nearly 50 parts per million higher, roughly 15% higher, than when St. John Paul II first addressed the issue of climate change in 1990. Some nations, communities, and individuals are already committed to reducing their greenhouse gas emissions. Promising grassroots, municipal and business efforts towards this are already underway. But to arrest global warming is a global challenge. And so at COP21, nations will hopefully agree on binding enforceable plans to keep the global temperature from rising more than 1.5 or 2 degrees Celsius above the pre-industrial levels. What about then the role of the U.S.? Pope Francis encouraged American leadership on this issue. At the political level, in terms of supporting an agreement to stop climate change, and at a personal level, to develop those deep-rooted ecological virtues necessary for healing, protecting, and preserving our planet. In other words, Pope Francis calls for ecological conversion on the part of all. The Pope is calling on America to honor its tradition and founding principles. There is a great stream of environmental reverence in American sensibility, its thought, going back to the writings of Emerson, Thoreau, Whiteman, and so on. And as you know very well, President Roosevelt is presented as one president of the United States who had a lot of interest and passion for protecting the environment. Today, American support for the United Nations, as well as international leadership, are more needed than ever, specifically to help solve the crisis of climate change. No country can solve this problem alone, nor can the poorer ones without much help. The threat to our common home requires common solutions. It requires strong international agreements to phase out harmful carbon emissions and to move instead to renewable energies. And this is a central message of Laudato Si. It's a central message which responds to a central question which Pope Francis also put, namely, what kind of world do we wish to bequeath to those who will come after us? And in responding to that question, he addresses this message, which essentially is what you have in Laudato Si. And for us, particularly Christians, with belief in scriptures and guided by scripture, it is important also to recognize that the earth was given to us as a home by God. And it was given to us under the imagery of a garden. It is not for anything that the book of Genesis refers to the earth given to Adam and Eve in terms of a garden. Because a garden is always taken care of. It is cared, it is protected, and it is nurtured, so it remains a garden. When we fail to keep a garden, it becomes a wilderness. So our earth was given to us as a garden home. And we, again, may not bequeath this to our children or future generations as a wilderness. The point of this encyclical is that we receive this as a gift of God, beautiful and good as a garden, and we may not bequeath it as wilderness to those who come after us. So, my dear friends, I've sought to address a few challenges and you've been very patient with me. But basically, it's just been the type of tools that arise from comprehensive and morally grounded vision of human and natural ecology of Pope Francis. And then tools found in the writing of other popes and in Catholic social teaching, and tools produced by the ongoing experience and innovation of courageous leaders and activists who focus on common destiny of all nations and all people, and on a shared engagement instead of insistence on being an exception to worldwide conditions. And so it is our great hope that the call of Laudato Si at every level will find a hearing, and that it will successfully inspire all who go to France, Paris in December with a clear sense of virtue and values, and following the example of Pope Francis, who believes that reality is far more important and greater than ideas, to not limit the activity to simply discussion of ideas, but come out with concrete measures and concrete decisions to protect and to ensure that our world continues to be a safe place to live, and a garden that we can bequeath to our children. So yes, my dear friends, the real danger comes from man. It is the human person and not the systems and the structures which have endangered the earth. It is the human person, and so equally we seek and we hope that encyclical will drive us to a genuine moral conversion, ecological conversion, and the education for what the Holy Father referred to as global ecological citizenship, to make us all sensitive to the well-being and the needs of our environment, so that ensuring a safer environment, the well-being of creation would be ensured, as well as the well-being of all who live in this earth as our home. And so we received a garden. Let us endeavor to bequeath a garden to our children and those who will come after us. Thank you for your kind attention. Thank you.
We have time for some questions. Let me just give it a moment for those who are filtering out, but I do want to get to the questions quick so we can get through several of them. Thank you, Cardinal Turkson. First question from the audience. What does the African church have to teach the American church, in general and in particular, about living out the message of Laudato Si?
Briefly, it's this. In several cultures of the southern part of the globe, there is deep reverence for creation, but a reverence for creation which sometimes gets also distorted into some kind of, if you want, fetishism. And so in some cultures you find, elements of nature are revered and respected, and sometimes become even, a fetish. Stop adore, stop worship, and all of that. Laudato Si is not calling for that. Laudato Si is not calling for the divinization of nature or any part of it. Laudato Si is calling for a respect of nature, if you want, in the terms of St. Francis, as a brother, as a sister, because our lives derive from the earth. The earth produces the nourishment that supports and nourishes our lives, and so it is just proper to respect the earth and treat it with dignity. But that's not the same as divinizing the earth or any part of nature and worshiping it. So the cultures in the South invite us to be sensitive to this, respect for creation, but they also invite us not to divinize any part of creation.
Right. Thank you. Second question. In his recent address to the United Nations a few days ago, Pope Francis spoke of, quote, the right of the environment. Federico Lombardi described this as a new expression. What implications might this new expression have for the advancing of Catholic social teaching and moral theology?
It's certainly a new expression, but again, it is this. As you may know, what we refer to as a church's social teaching is something that dates from Scripture, from Revelation. That is filtered, developed, and thought about, and fomented by under the impulse of philosophy and all the social sciences. And it is an ongoing venture. Despite the fact that we have the compendium of the social teachings of the church published, nobody is saying that the development of the church's social teaching has come to an end. It has not. As long as we live on this earth and as long as the church exists on this earth, it has got the task of always applying revelation to human condition and the very many challenges of our existence. So the church's social teaching is an ongoing is something which is ongoing and is still developing. And that means that there is the room for new expressions which serve to make some of this relationship be clearer. So if the Holy Father referred to the right of environment, anything, it's certainly a new terminology, but it becomes a way then of playing particular emphasis to this, to the environment as worthy of respect, worthy of dignity, and worthy of treatment as such. So it's a if you want, it's a very pregnant way, if you want, of referring to how we need to treat the earth with a certain amount of respect on account of its inherent dignity.
All right, here's a long question. By and large, the Boston College community is part of the problem in that it is made up of a high percentage of affluent individuals who create huge carbon footprints, particularly in contrast to the poor in the global South, who are most vulnerable and will continue to suffer more of the negative effects of our overly consumptive lifestyles. What does Pope Francis want and expect Boston College, particularly its leaders, to do to rectify this inequality?
I don't. No, this is not like offending my host or anything like that. But I think what Pope Francis expects from Boston College is what he expects from all of us. What he expects from all of us is ecological conversion. It's a certain amount of sensitivity to the well-being, the healthy well-being of the state of the world around us, and also the state of people with whom we live. The well-being of creation, that is very, it's not for nothing that the account of creation in Genesis punctuates the process of creation of the universe with good, very good, good, very good. The creation, as from the hands of God, is a gift. It's a gift that has been given to us, which requires and demands of us that we treat this gift with love, at least, with great appreciation, and therefore with great respect. And the least that we can do is to so treat it, and this then will require from us what the encyclical presents as ecological conversion, a certain amount of sensitivity to the need to treat with some respect the earth and also the people around us. If the earth requires respectful treatment because it nourishes and sustains our life, and we ourselves as Adam and Adama were drawn from the earth, the other side about human persons also is the same. The stories, the scripture presents humanity, the human family, essentially as a brotherhood. As it were, the logic of creation or the grammar of human coexistence and creation is brotherhood. Cain and Abel having been born from the same womb. So the Greek word adelphos simply means from the same womb. So all from the same womb means, therefore, that they are equal in dignity. Coming from the same womb, there's none who has more dignity than the other. So all of humanity then, referred to and addressed as brothers, just refers to the fact that by origin we share a common dignity. There will be differentiation, so somebody can become a farmer like Cain, somebody can become a pastoralist like Abel and all of that. The differentiations are there, but essentially they are adelphoi, from the same womb and therefore equal in dignity. So that's again why in the past 3 years, all the New Year message of Pope Francis has been the issue of brotherhood. For him, it is very important because that also is the basis of his call for respect of those on the periphery, those in the vulnerable in society, the aged, the shut-ins, and all of that. It's basically because the human person belonging to this brotherhood therefore needs to be treated as such with the same amount of attention. So, what would Pope Francis require of Boston College? The same ecological conversion, so that we can all ensure the well-being of nature and the well-being of all around us.
As you said, Boston Common was saved by putting a limit on the number of cows. World population today is about 3 times as high as in 1950. How can we best address the impact of population growth on global poverty and the natural environment?
Thanks. Over this issue of demography or demographics and sustainability of the earth and all its forms and everything that is related to it, there's some amount of discussion. Some argue and contend that the resources available to us on the earth are such that it can nourish and can sustain the population of the world 3 times over. There are some who still contend that the impact of population, the growth of people on the environment is such that the earth cannot sustain the amount of the increase and growth in population. We have the 2 currents, the 2 positions are expressed. Now, lest somebody thinks that the church therefore is for unbridled whatever growth in population, you will recall that the Holy Pope Francis, again during his return journey from Philippines, when he was asked a question about population control or regulation, whatever, I remember he used this expression, which later on, a lot of people took him on. He said he was advising the Filipinos not to breed like rabbits. Okay, and people later on took him on, and somebody said, well, I have a family of 6. Am I also a rabbit or whatever? So that's it now. The church is not opposed to birth control. The church is not opposed to regulation of birth and all of that. The church is never opposed to any of those. The objection that the church has had has always been with question of methods and all of that. So yes, if it becomes necessary, some amount of we need to pay attention to our growth of population, with due respect also to the method that is used. But again, the issue is the world really now in need of resources to maintain its population, or is an overly and excessive accumulation of these same resources in the hands of a few? This is the issue ultimately to be judged. At Davos at the beginning of the year, Davos Clusters in Germany, the World Economic Forum, Oxfam came out with figures which shows that the wealth of the world is concentrated in the hands of just 1% of the world's population, with the 99% left whatever. This has been what Pope Francis at one point was also talking about, the great inequality that exists in the world. So again, that's the situation. Is the world really in need of resources such that without them, they will not be able to maintain the world's population? Or it is problem with distribution of the resources and endowments of creation? That ultimately is the issue that we need to deal with. But the issue of accumulation of wealth in a small percentage and all of that, that's also something that has been documented, that's been proven, and that's been talked about a lot. So at a certain point, it's up to us.
A few more questions. When drafting the encyclical, what were your hopes in terms of engaging people of other faiths?
Well, Pope John the 23rd, when he was drafting the encyclical, Pacem in Terris, for the first time addressed the thing to, venerable brethren and then all men of goodwill. That was the first time that expression was introduced into any drafting of encyclical. Now, Pope Francis does not simply say all men of goodwill, but he refers to all dwellers in this home. So all of humanity. And then he goes on in this encyclical, just as he himself recommends the part of dialogue as a way of fashioning and building consensus on things. In the encyclical himself, he himself promotes this dialogue as a way of going ahead and dealing with a very sensitive question about ensuring the well-being of the earth and the human person, and even the issue of climate change. And so 2 things characterize this encyclical, which is worth noting: collegiality, and then, if you want, dialogue. This encyclical is one encyclical which shows how much the Pope quotes local bishops' conferences, as if to say that he's teaching with all the bishops around the world. So this encyclical quotes the Bishops' Conference of the United States, the Bishops' Conference of South Africa, the Bishops' Conference of India, the Philippines, and all. It's a collegial exercise, as it were, teaching with the rest of the bishops around the world about the current situation. The other feature is the quotes are not only from bishops' conferences, but also from other religions. And so this is the openness to this dialogue that the Holy Father signals. So the sense of dialogue which he signals by his own openness to the wisdom of these other religions, to the issue at hand, is what disposes us also to deal with this issue.
Thank you. Just a couple more. This is, I guess, a little biographical or personal. When in your lifetime did you realize that global climate change was a major problem for our world?
In my own lifetime, right? Interesting. I was born in a mining town, in a manganese mining town in the western part of Ghana. It's a mining area. The town next to ours was a gold mining town, and so on. Ours was a manganese mining town. My father worked in this mining town as a carpenter, and so very, very modest means and all of that. But there was a free-flowing river, which in the rainy season flooded, which we couldn't cross, and so as a kid growing up, we always look for the rainy season so we can have a holiday, because we can't cross the river because it's a flood. So now, I was home last August. This river, which used to flood, and sometimes there were cases where it swept away people. This has now become just a trickle of, some small, body of water meandering there. What has happened is that all the source where the whatever, it's all been farmed. Okay, so the origin, the source of the water is exposed, so it's not. So everything is gone. The mining town itself was a manganese mining town, so surface mining. And that meant the competition at one point between the mining company, the need for more terrain, and farming community in the village. So while the farmers wanted new terrain, unfortunately we had this other system of farming which is not sustainable. It's called shifting cultivation. Farmers go on a property, farm it for about 5 or so years, and they feel it's no more fertile, and so they abandon it and move on to another piece of land. So it just means that they're always moving, and the mine is always also moving, so the necessary clash and conflict also ensued and all of that. So now with the drying of this river, and everything in this small village, having kind of, it's basically, it should not be, because we live south, way south. Ghana is only 5 degrees north of the equator, so completely equatorial climate. But here's a patch of wilderness in this small town. One could say it's probably be on account of the administration. We didn't take care of things, but whatever. But this is the place where I grew up. As I drive through, I can only, my mind goes back to how things were. They know more. It's almost like a statement in a encyclical that you will not be able to talk to your children about what environment you yourself grew up in and all of that. So the change is on, and this is the thing. The encyclical talks about the role of human beings in provoking this change, which is also very well disputed. But in this case, that's what it is. Human activity and human occupation has made this town what it is right now. It has a mining, a farming, whatever type of thing, but the town is what it is now on account of human activity. So this is my first experience of climate change, with so very many others that I can talk about, from being what we do now. Bishops from the Pacific Islands visit our office, and they tell us that the highest point of their island is only 4.5 meters. So one strong wave is enough to sweep the whole island. Where they used to grow crops is now on the seawater. So, it's a reality that's there out for all who wants to see.
Thank you. We have time for one last question, and here I'm mindful of one of our great theologians, Michael Hyams, who talks about the Catholic University as having a particular role of being the church thinking. And I think one of the most heartening, wonderful reasons for this moment of hope in the church more generally is to see both Pope Francis, your leadership, to see it's not just in the Catholic universities, that there's this larger collegiality and dialogue that shows an awful lot of thinking and reflection at this moment. For our last question, and I'm sure that several of my favorite Catholics around the country are happy that this was written down. In ensuring sustainable humanity and a sustainable planet, how do we affirm and sustain, through the structures of the church and other institutions, the role of women, who often have the primary burdens of caring for their families and their environments?
No, that's a good question. That's a good question. So, as you know, this encyclical was just now published in Rome. Father Michael sits here, with him, so he passed this advice on to Pope Francis. So we devised a way of making this encyclical have the maximum impact at the time of publication. So the Holy Father sent out a series of messages to bishops to get them on the same page on the day of the publication of the encyclical. But I think that follows that is, in publishing this in several local communities, again, like ours in Africa, the issue of women comes, just jump to the surface. The issue of women, we cannot talk about human ecology, which is like rehabilitating and ensuring the well-being of human beings in all sectors in society, without looking at the components. Now, it is true, women in several parts of the world, although not clearly treated as excluded, invariably also occupy roles that can sometimes be described as excluded. Excluded in being treated unequally, lack of equality in treatment, lack of equality in roles, lack of equality in access to property and land in my part of the world, for example, in Southeast Asia and all of that. So this lack of equality is what diminishes the recognition of the dignity of the woman, and so in talking about sustainable whatever also brings this to the fore. Therefore, in the light of this, the encyclical would therefore wish that there were changes also in this regard. Rehabilitation of the rightful place of women in society. In traditional ones like ours, the woman's role needs to be redefined. Their access to land, it's not only men who can own land on which they can farm, but also women. Since it's been largely proven that when women are farmers, the yield is higher than when men are farmers. This is again documented by UNDP. So if this is the case, then the thing is creating access to women, access to land is something that we also needs to be dealt with. So it is true, the issue of sustainability requires a review of the role of women in society and what kind of places are ascribed to them, and that must also, if the issue of, is that thing about others also implied? Okay, there's no answer to that, so I suppose it's not implied. So, thanks.